It is August 13th, 2025, and all eyes are on the upcoming summit between Trump and Putin in Alaska. But before we get to that, Trump is preparing by having a quick conversation with Zelensky as they spoke through a video conference while Zelensky is in Berlin meeting with his European handlers there. And Trump is now apparently saying that he is going to know within 2 minutes as to whether or not there is going to be a ceasefire when he goes into this conference with Putin. In fact, it seems like a ceasefire is the only thing that Trump is focused on. But what should he be focused on? And what should we be concerned about when it comes to overall U.S. foreign policy right now? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Colonel Larry Wilkerson, a U.S. Army combat veteran, former Chief of Staff to the U.S. Secretary of State, and a senior fellow at the Eisenhower Media Network. Colonel Wilkerson, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, I'm glad I get to talk to you today. I know that there is a lot going on, but I want to start off with the latest happening right now as we have Zelensky arriving in Berlin earlier today for a meeting with European leaders and a conference call with Trump. Now, this is, of course, ahead of Trump's planned meeting with Putin in Alaska on Friday. And as we get into the summit, it's been interesting to see some of these various reports on what Russia may be offering, what the US may be offering, and whether or not we could see a deal. So, how do you see kind of the atmosphere as we're going into this summit?
Not very conducive to success, as a matter of fact, which is a sad thing for me to say. I didn't give it a lot of percentage of success possibility, given the characters that are going to be arrayed in Alaska, mainly the mercurial character of our own president. But the comments that Trump has made just in the last few hours lead me to believe that it's going to be typical Trump. And the one that disturbed me the most was when he said, I will know in 2 minutes. You will know in 2 minutes? Putin is coming ostensibly to tell you for the first time about the real reasons. He's been saying it over and over again, Sergei Lavrov too, and others in Russia, that the special military operation was mounted in the first place. And if you'll listen, you will have a whole new view, I guarantee you, because your media, your intelligence services, including the triumvirate, MI6, Mossad, and CIA, who now are truly a triumvirate for the empire, have been lying to you, obfuscating, giving you the wrong information, especially vis-a-vis Russia. Putin is now going to take some time in a private, more or less, setting with you and tell you the truth. And you've just said you're going to know in 2 minutes. You couldn't know in 2 minutes the history of this whole operation. You couldn't know in an hour, maybe 2 or 3 hours with the expertise that Putin has in these matters. You could know a little bit. But that's very disquieting. And then this dynamic of, I understand this secure video teleconference with Zelensky is also going to include in the background, on the sides, I don't know, some of the European leaders. I would suspect Friedrich Merz, who former CEO of BlackRock, is just another member of the oligarchical empire and a vassal of the empire in that respect. So I don't think it's looking very good for this meeting. Some have called it an ambush for Putin. I don't, because Putin will be the most competent man in the room by far. And I don't think you're going to ambush him. Now, if you're trying to assassinate him or something like that, that's quite a different matter altogether. And the response from the Russians would be spellbindingly quick and overwhelming. So, no, don't put MI6, CIA, and Mossad to that task, please, and certainly not in Alaska. But these are some things that disturb me right now. And the more Trump speaks, the more I become disturbed.
Oh, absolutely. I'm right there with you. And as you're pointing it out, I'm sitting there going, okay, people like you and I, right? We've watched what Russia has said for years now. We've followed the fact that Putin has been pretty clear, not only about Russia's demands, how we got into this conflict, and his story hasn't changed. He's been saying the same thing for more than a decade now. If Trump hasn't figured that out, if he hasn't followed any of that, if he's having to go to Putin to sit face to face for Putin to then explain to him, that does not make me feel very confident about where the United States is and about the fact that our president does not seem to have a clear understanding. He looks at this war and he thinks, oh, well, Russians and Ukrainians are both dying. It's bad for both sides. He does not realize the dire situation that Ukraine is in, the side that the US is actively supporting, versus the situation that Russia is in, where they don't have to have a deal. Putin does not have to come out of this with some agreement to end the war. So when it comes to the fact that Putin agreed not only to this meeting, but also to meet in Alaska, how do you view that? Is he really trying here in the sense that he's trying to make it known to the world that Russia is open to negotiations while not giving up on their demands and kind of what led them up to this point? Or is there more to it?
I think it's quite simple, really. Not in terms of the complexity of the situation, but in terms of Putin himself. I think what he wants is a last effort, one-on-one, with President Trump to try and convince him of the real purpose of his entire military action. And that purpose, of course, is not got anything really to do with Ukraine. It's only incidental that Ukraine is the proxy we're using to threaten him. And that's his purpose, is to counteract that threat. And the threat is existential to Russia. And he feels that way, and I feel quite confident that most of Russia feels that way. It is existential for Russia to have NATO positioned, 400 miles from Moscow in the eastern part of Ukraine with missiles that could be nuclear tipped. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the genuine threat that he's facing. And he's very serious, and Russia's very serious, and Belarusia is right there with him, and probably the rest of the CSTO, that this is something to go to war over. And so you must understand this, Mr. President, is like I were in northern Mexico or I were in British Columbia with nuclear tipped missiles and a military alliance that threatened you. Do you understand that, Mr. Trump? Do you understand how visceral this is for Russia? He wants one last opportunity to do this, because I think he's also convinced, as is Sergei Lavrov and the rest of the what I'll call the diplomacy and national security apparatus for Russia, is pretty much convinced that we're hopeless and that eventually they're going to have to go to war and they're going to have to go to nuclear weapons. They do not want to do that. Neither does their new ally, whom we have forced into the alliance, Xi Jinping. And increasingly now, Modi. We have done the impossible. We have made the three most powerful, populous countries in the world our enemies, and they're allied. And we've now put India into the group. This is insanity, but this is what we're doing. And Putin wants one last chance. So at least the history books will say he gave it all he had to convince us that we are wrong in our interpretation of his rationale for the special military operation, that Ukraine, he knows, is our proxy and NATO's proxy for bringing him and Russia into chagrin, bringing him down, regime change in Russia. Does Trump know any of this? I don't think so. I do not think so. I think people have been lying to Donald Trump. Now, I'm giving him a little credit here. I know people criticize me for giving him any credit at all, but I think he's been lied to consistently by the bureaucracy and by the oligarchs who are behind that bureaucracy. And their purpose is to thwart China, and they see Russia as the road to that purpose. And they got to get rid of Russia first. He doesn't understand that, I don't think. Maybe giving him too much credit, but I don't think he understands that. Were Putin able in the 2-3 hours or whatever they have to convince Trump of even a modicum of that, then we would maybe have a slightly different situation and just a scintilla of success. But I don't look for it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, because especially, and I know that it's been interesting to watch Trump the second time around, where the first time around, he admitted that one of the biggest mistakes that he made was surrounding himself with the wrong people. And then he comes for a second term and he chooses Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. And I'm like, what are you doing? If you really want an end to any war anywhere, you are not going to have Rubio as your main guy there. But, scaling back a little bit and looking at what Russia is doing right now. And it is interesting the point that you made about India. Now, I mean, we have Modi agreeing to go to China for the first time in over 7 years. And it's like, hey, Trump, you did that, right? Your tariffs and your tensions and your pressure, they, exactly as you were saying, are pushing all of these countries closer together. And while we've been hearing for months, really years now, about the weapon shortages and the manpower shortages in Ukraine. Russia's not having those problems. And on top of that, we have reports this week that Russian forces have made significant advances in the Donbass near the city of Pokrovsk, with even the New York Times noting that they have advanced several miles into Ukrainian-held territory, threatening to outflank Ukraine's positions. So when we're in this position right now where you have a number of people looking at this and going, okay, are Kiev's forces going to be able to survive this year, let alone go into 2026 at the rate that we're going? Do you think that the US realizes that, Putin could walk away with no deal whatsoever, and then we could have a version of an end to this war that NATO is really not going to like, and there's not going to be anything they can do about it?
Well, that's a lot to unpack. let me start with this. George Kennan, Brent Scowcroft, and Henry Kissinger, Kennan right before he died, but still lucid man, came to see Colin Powell when he was Secretary of State. I think it was 2004. And each one of them said to Colin Powell, the most incredible mistake you could ever make is to force China and Russia together. Now we've forced China, India, and Russia together. Just to put a cap on that, this is a disaster. In terms of the other part of your comments and your question, though, I think we're really at a point here now where what I've said all along, and I will continue to say till I go to my grave, which will probably not be too far in the future, is that we are confronted right now. And I think there are some oligarchs, and these oligarchs are not just in America, they're in Europe too, who are behind the real power that's being wielded right now, realize this. And so they're taking their approach to it, and I think their approach is dead wrong. We're in the middle of an inexorable shift of power from the West to the East. The magnet of that shift, the pull on that shift of power, I'm talking about all elements of power, economic, financial, intelligence, cultural, informational, you name it, is China. They are the undisputed economic power of the world now. We do not want to admit that, and these oligarchs want to stop that from happening. They're willing to go to the use of nuclear weapons, which really frightens me, in order to stop this movement of power back to the East. In that, we have created an entire theater of operations against the current enemy leading that charge, if you will, because it's become the conduit for this power. Central Asia and Russia have become the conduit for that power to flow. We've got the Arctic, where we're stoking things right now. We've got the General Donahue, who went and talked about Kaliningrad in a most atrocious way. I'd have fired that guy on the spot if I were Donald Trump. No, if I were the European commander, I would have fired him. But I got to assume that both of those individuals, including P.D. Hegseth, that disaster at the Pentagon, approved this general to say what he said. Not only was he wrong about the rapidity with which we could pull off that operation, he was wrong in very basic strategic terms that Belarusia and Russia would absolutely react. And this would be what I said. This would be Putin finally understanding that he can't deal with us and that he's going to have to go to war. And then all the way down through Ukraine, which we know all about, and down to, and here we're going to negotiate in Alaska over Ukraine, and we're pulling off a coup, so to speak, in Azerbaijan and Armenia. And we're trying to pull another coup off in Georgia. We Americans simply don't know this. We forced a government on Tbilisi. That government was for absolute contact and work with EU, NATO, Washington. Then the Georgians rose up and elected a new government, which is in power right now. Barely elected them, but they elected them. Good election, that party won. Therefore, balanced relations. They don't want to make Moscow angry or Washington or Brussels. They want balanced relations, which is the only way the Caucasus, any country in the Caucasus, should think about it. We're trying to overthrow that government. And on top of all of that, we're down there trying to restart the war with Iran and stoke Bibi to do it. This is incredible. And Putin's walking right into that, knowing, I think, in his own mind, that all these potentialities are indeed real. And yet he's going to talk about this situation in Ukraine with a man who's probably not going to give him the time of day once it's over. This is a real tragedy in more ways than one, but it's a huge product of what's happening. For 2,000 years, power was in the East. All the empires were in the East, the Persian, the Mughal, the Mongol, you name the empire. Even the Western Roman Empire had to deal with the East, and the Eastern Roman Empire, which lasted a lot longer and became the Byzantine Empire, they were all in the East. That's where the power was. And then it suddenly shifted. It shifted beginning with Ferdinand and Isabella and a trip to the New World and the rape of the New World and the plunder of the New World, all brought back to create empires in France and Spain and Britain, the biggest one of all. And then it flowed over to America when George III made his colossal mistake and, didn't keep his colony in the New World. It's going back. All that power is going back, which is just to say that you can't stop it. So you need to accommodate it. You need to deal with a multinodal world and accommodate that power shift. We're not going to do that. We're going to fight it to tooth and nail. And I fear we're going to, at the end of the day, we're going to use nuclear weapons to try and arrest that shift. All these empires, hundreds of empires in the past who went down, they're all down. I used to tell my students at William & Mary, show me where any empire is still existing in the world other than ours. Are we unique? Is it written on granite that the American empire is forever? Okay, so we're going down sooner or later. Well, you got two choices on how to go down. All empires in the past, every one of them, did not have the technological means to stop their decline instantly. We do. We have nuclear weapons, almost 6,000 warheads. And that scares me because this is a unique situation in history. It's the same in terms of an empire going down and an empire coming up, but it's not the same in terms of the deteriorating empire and its mechanism for arresting its deterioration and taking you with it. That scares me because it's a new dynamic in the world. It's never been here before. And also, by the way, our empire, America, has destroyed every nuclear weapons treaty except New START, which goes out in February. And that is another purpose of Putin being in Alaska, because he wants to tell Trump that he is also very frightened of this prospect of nuclear weapons use, that it's very costly. It's costly for Xi Jinping, who's talked to Putin about this, to build out his complex, which he started doing now. And they could all save money. We could all save money and make the world a much safer place if we had a new treaty regime. All were in it and we cut our stockpiles. Putin wants to talk about that. Trump said he wanted to talk about that. He said before he was inaugurated and right after that he wanted to talk about the problem with nuclear weapons in the world, and he wanted to talk to Putin. Well, here's your opportunity, but I think they're going to waste it. Not Putin, but Trump is probably going to waste it. That's a long story and a citation of a historical map that, would take 10 years to talk about. But that's what's happening, and we're defying it. And we're defying it at our ultimate peril.
Wow. And wow, I'm just trying to soak all of that in. But, you're right when it comes to when I'm looking at the fact that we have all these countries, such as, the US is the main one with nuclear weapons. If the US were to attack Russia, I would assume that Russia would attack back, and then that would kind of lead off to this chain of events where essentially the world as we know it would be no more, right? Is that what we're looking at? And has there ever been a bigger threat of true nuclear war breaking out between multiple countries than we're currently facing right now?
No, I think the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is right. This is more dangerous than Cuba in 1962 or Berlin in 1961. And it's that way because we have two components in the empire that are extremely dangerous: incompetent leadership, and it's across the board in the Congress, in the Supreme Court, in the White House. Incompetent leadership. And we have labs like Los Alamos, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Sandia Labs, with new people in them, 40-year-olds who are brilliant. Think of Anduril and Palantir and other Silicon Valley-like corporations that are making things for the Israelis to kill babies with, for example. Think about that. They're in our labs now, and they are actually working with this $2 trillion that we've allocated to it on new nuclear weapons that will give us the capacity to strike first, ride out the retaliation, and maybe kill 1 billion, 2 billion people, but the Earth will probably still be here and we'll be triumphant. This is serious talk at these labs.
That's incredibly concerning to me, right? And something that I don't feel like we're getting enough talk about all around. Now, on the topic of nuclear weapons, and at least what the US claims that they're concerned about, I did want to get into the Middle East a little bit, as you have, all of us kind of waiting and watching to see what's going to happen with Iran. You have Foreign Policy Magazine, which published an article this week with the title, "The Next Israel-Iran War is Coming," in which they say that Israel is likely to launch another war with Iran before December, perhaps even as early as late August, and that the next phase of this war will be even more violent than the last. So how do you see this prediction, and kind of what are you keeping an eye on when it comes to really the US and Israel and their plan for the furthering of war with Iran?
I think Trita's on to something. Trita knows Iran a lot better than I. I've known Trita for a long time. I think he's serious in what he's written. And I think the situation is ripe for a situation like he describes. And here's why. The IDF is on its back legs right now, the Israeli Defense Force. They have taken more casualties. They have a higher post-traumatic stress count. Even the IDF PTSD component that monitors this will tell you that. They have a higher KIA and WIA. They have a higher reservist rate of not showing up. Some reservists who had money actually voted with their feet. They're gone. They left Israel. As have, I think, somewhere close to 1 million Jewish Israelis have left Israel. Many of them have just defied Netanyahu's order not to leave. They got money. They go get a boat on the Mediterranean and they sail, and they're gone. So Israel is on, to a certain extent, its hind legs right now. That is to say, it's reeling. And part of that is what Iran did to it in the so-called 12-day beautiful war. Israel got shocked because it was shellacked during that time period. So Netanyahu has a choice, and he's already made one mistake in that choice. He's decided to attack Gaza to the last Palestinian, and even to leave the IDF there, something even Arik Sharon wouldn't do, because he knew he withdrew from Gaza after the operations he conducted there, bloody though they were, because he knew the IDF would be decimated. Hamas has not been defeated. It's not been defeated. And now Netanyahu is leading this effort off with destroying the last two vestiges of Palestinian capability in Gaza. He's taking on Gaza City. Yesterday, he killed Anas al-Sharif. His people did, probably one of the bravest Palestinian journalists that ever lived. And he did that on purpose because he doesn't want any news coming out of that area, as he kills ruthlessly men, women, and children and razes Gaza City. And then he'll do Ramallah. That's his Rubicon. When he crosses that, he's got to have war with Iran. He's got to have the United States bail him out, because he will not be capable of keeping the state of Israel on its feet. It's economically a basket case right now. The Chinese are even sailing up the Suez Canal with their ships now because they know the Houthis want to attack them, but no one else will come up that way. So the Houthis have been instrumental in this conflict. They are probably some of the bravest people in the world in that regard because they've got very little to do it with, but they've done it. So that means he's got to have a war with Iran, and it means U.S. help because Trump will be presented with the state of Israel collapsing or his weighing in. I don't think he can stand up to that pressure. So we'll get involved. That then says, do we get involved just aerially? That is to say, bombing the bejesus out of Iran, which won't do anything except make them madder. Or do we actually put troops on the ground, which is what it will require to bring a resolution to a conflict started with Iran by both Israel and the United States. That's the end of the empire. That is a 10-year struggle with 90 million people who will take the empire to task more than Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, Libya together, and will be destroyed. What will we do there? There's another outcome that could happen. Say Trump says no to Bibi, and Israel is truly going down. Bibi will use a nuclear weapon or two or three. The other day, he had the colossal gall to say on public television, genocide. If I'd wanted a genocide, I could have done that in a day. Think about what that means. Think about what that means. It would have taken 2 or 3 of his nuclear weapons on Gaza to do that. But that's what he was saying. This man is Adolf Hitler reincarnated. And we just might be going in on his side. You want to speed the disaster that is the empire collapsing? Go ahead.
Yeah, the American people really need to start paying attention to that and to, just what we've gotten into. And the last thing that I want to bring up, I know that, every time we go through a presidential election, the most popular, or at least in recent decades, the most popular candidate is the one who promises to end the endless wars, right? They promise, okay, outside of Joe Biden, right? They promise that we're going to get in there, no new wars. Is exactly what Trump has done twice now. He gets back into office. We're not even 7 months into his second term. And yet, as you're laying it out here, we're looking at not just multiple endless wars, but nuclear war and possibly the end of the world as we know it. So what does that tell you? And what should that be telling the American people who every election they line up, they vote for the guy who tells them what they want to hear. But when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, nothing really ever changes.
It should tell the American people that we are not a democratic federal republic or a federal republic with democratic trappings, however you want to look at it. We are an empire. We are not run by an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a legal branch or a judicial branch. What we're run by is a group of technocrats, billionaires who live in Europe, who live in Russia, some of them, live in the United States, who have dual or triple citizenship, who lurk behind the power circles and orchestrate everything. Think Friedrich Merz, the new chancellor of Germany and former CEO of BlackRock. Thank you very much. Probably the number one tyrant agency in the world. And they need to take their republic back. Or as Benjamin Franklin said, they haven't been tending their republic. And I'm not sure it's possible. I really am not sure it's possible. Even if you got a substantial number of Americans understanding this, at least in its visceral form, and taking action, however that might be, ballot box or whatever, and it might turn out, remember the Declaration of Independence and what it says? When you run into a situation that you can't cure in any other way but with force of arms, it might take a damn revolution. And revolutions have a tendency to come out worse than what was before. So I'd prefer not to see that. But we are not a democratic federal republic anymore. We are an empire. We do not listen to the people who live in the empire unless they are telling us what we want to hear. And we live for, you ready for this now? We live for making war. That's it. We live for making war. We're even looking at an economic crisis by Christmas, mind you, that might be so damaging to Trump's posture and indeed to the empire's posture in the global economic community, that we start another world war in order to try and get out of that economic crisis we created.
Yeah, it's very telling the dire situation that we're in. And I mean, I'm so glad that I got to talk to you today because you have a lot of incredible insight into what the American people should be paying attention to. And as a reminder of, I know every time we start to get frustrated, then you have someone like Elon Musk go, "Oh, let me start a third party. That'll fix everything." And it's like, no, there's a lot of things that you're not going to vote your way out of it, but we also need to be paying attention to everything that the government is doing and truly leading us into, whether it's economically, domestically, or on the foreign policy stage.
We have a nasty habit in America of associating people who make lots and lots of money with genius. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily true. I should say with wisdom. It's not necessarily true.
Yeah, pay attention to the fact that someone like Elon Musk did not get there because he was just so smart or he just woke up one day and figured out, how do I become a multi-billionaire? No, he had a lot of government contracts along the way. And I guess that also goes for someone like Trump too, right? Getting to this
Yes.
stage. For any, and we've seen this time and time again, for any legitimate presidential candidate who's actually going to make some changes, I just don't have the faith that they would be able to make it to the White House. I mean, Trump knows what to say, he knows how to campaign. He also knows how to get up to the, top spot and then fill his cabinet with all of these neocons and hawks that are just going to further the US foreign policy agenda. When it comes to how aware the American people are of this, how do you see that awareness right now? Is it growing at all, or is there still really a long way to go here?
I think it is growing. It's inchoate, though. It doesn't have the force of cohesion yet, but it's growing, and it's growing over things like the Epstein scandal. And I don't care how it grows and from what it grows. And besides, I think Epstein was anathema. I'd put him in the category with Bibi Netanyahu. So, however it grows, and it's growing over other things too. If you've seen any of these very few Republican congressmen and women who will go back to a town hall meeting in their district or their state and seen the reception they've gotten, you understand what I'm talking about. They're being hooted off the stage. So that's happening too. And it's going to increase in profoundness in that area because these tariffs are going to cause prices to go up on basics all across the country. And Americans are going to have little disposable income, whereas they have been fairly accustomed, at least the top 50%, at having enough disposable income to go out to eat, to do this, to do that. They're not going to have any of that left by Christmas. So the recognition is going to be profound, and it's going to come from different directions, but it's going to come, I think. Question is it going to come in time, and are they going to figure out what you and I just talked about, that they need to do something and need to do it fast?
Yeah, certainly. A lot at stake here all around, and I'm glad that we got to go over a lot of the latest. I think a good lesson in a number of areas. Colonel Larry Wilkerson, a U.S. Army combat veteran, former chief of staff to the U.S. Secretary of State, and a senior fellow at the Eisenhower Media Network. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.